Imagine being one of 17 children, not in a historical documentary or a quirky sitcom, but in a real modern-day house where your worth is measured by how little space you take up and how many chores you can finish before the sun goes down. My parents didn't see us as individuals. They saw us as a collection, a legacy, or perhaps just a workforce to keep their vision of a mega-family afloat, but the reality was a suffocating hunger for a single moment of being truly seen. I am the middle child of 17, the invisible gear in a machine that finally ground to a halt when I decided that I was done being a ghost in my own home. And what I did to get their attention ended up tearing the entire family apart. Was I wrong for finally demanding to be more than just a number, or would you have burned it all down too if it meant someone would finally look you in the eye and say your name? Growing up in the Miller household was less like a family, and more like a poorly funded boarding school, where the headmasters were constantly distracted by the newest arrival. My parents, David and Sarah, had this obsession with growth, believing that a house full of children was the ultimate sign of a blessed life, but they forgot that blessings require maintenance, and love isn't something you can just divide by 17 and expect everyone to have enough to survive. By the time I was 10, I was already responsible for 3 of my younger siblings, changing diapers, supervising homework, and making sure they didn't wander off into the woods behind our property. My older siblings were the commanders, the ones who ran the household like a military operation, and the younger ones were the babies, who got what little affection was left over. Those of us in the middle, we were the workers, the silent shadows who kept the floor swept and the laundry moving in a never-ending cycle of industrial-sized loads. We lived in a massive, sprawling farmhouse that my father kept adding extensions to, but no matter how many rooms he built, there was never enough room to breathe. Dinner was a battlefield of reaching hands and loud voices, where if you didn't grab your portion in the first 30 seconds, you were stuck with the scraps. My parents sat at the head of the table, looking out over us with a sort of detached pride, as if they were surveying a successful crop rather than 17 human beings with individual dreams. I remember once winning a regional spelling bee in the 5th grade. I walked through the door holding my trophy, buzzing with a rare sense of pride, only to find the house in a state of total chaos because child number 14 had spiked a fever. My trophy was set on the counter, eventually pushed behind a stack of mail, and by the next morning, it was knocked into the trash and forgotten. That was my life. Every achievement swallowed by the collective noise of 16 other people. The physical environment was just as draining as the emotional neglect. Our kitchen was equipped with industrial-sized pots that looked like they belonged in a soup kitchen, and the pantry was stocked with generic bulk-buy cans that sat on the shelves like a colorless army. There were no personal snacks, no hidden treats. Everything was communal, which meant everything was up for grabs. I remember the smell of the house most vividly, a constant, heavy mix of baby powder, floor cleaner, and cheap laundry detergent that never seemed to leave my clothes. It was the scent of a system, not a home. My room was shared with 4 of my sisters, and our beds were stacked like cargo in a warehouse. There was no desk to study on, no wall space to hang a poster of a band I liked, and certainly no privacy to just sit and think. If I wanted a moment of peace, I had to lock myself in the bathroom, but even then, someone would be pounding on the door within 30 seconds, claiming an emergency. We weren't allowed to have friends over because the house was a sanctuary for family only. But the truth was that my parents didn't want outsiders seeing the cracks in the foundation. They didn't want people to see how we really lived when the cameras weren't rolling. Every Saturday was deep clean day, where we were treated like unpaid laborers. My father would walk around with a literal clipboard, checking off baseboards and window tracks, and if a single spot was missed, the whole group was grounded from the 1 hour of television we were allowed on Sundays. It felt like we were constantly auditioning for our right to exist in their space. I remember the winter of my junior year, when the heater broke in the north wing of the house. Instead of fixing it, my father told us it was an opportunity to build character and practice sibling warmth. We spent 3 weeks huddled under communal blankets, shivering while he posted a video about how our family was unplugged and reconnecting. He was wearing a designer parka in the video that probably cost enough to fix the furnace twice over. It was these little moments of hypocrisy that began to sharpen my resolve. I started keeping a secret tally of the grocery bills versus the gear my parents bought for their vlogging setup. While we were eating watered-down stews and discount bread, My dad was unboxing $5,000 drones to get sweeping cinematic shots of us playing in the yard. We weren't playing. We were following a storyboard. Run to the tree and laugh. My mother would scream, her voice sharp as a razor until the record button was pressed, at which point she transformed into a whispering angel of motherhood. As I got older, the resentment started to boil. I watched as my parents started a social media channel to document our wholesome life, filming us as we lined up by age to head to church or sit down for a staged family meeting, where everything looked perfect for the camera. Behind the scenes, we were exhausted. My sister, Chloe, who was 2 years older than me, was the first one to break. She ran away at 18 and hasn't spoken to my parents since, and in their eyes, she simply ceased to exist. They didn't even mourn her. They just reshuffled our chores and told us that Chloe had chosen a selfish path. That terrified me, but it also woke me up. I started realizing that the only way to get my parents' attention was to either be the best or the absolute worst, and since being the best was ignored, I started to lean into the chaos. I began small, skipping my assigned shifts in the kitchen or forgetting to pick up the toddlers from their play area, just to see if they would notice I was missing. They didn't. Not for hours. It wasn't until the dinner bell rang and my chair was empty that my mother asked, "Where is? Wait, which one is missing?" That sentence broke something inside of me. She had to count us to realize I wasn't there. I spent that night in the old shed behind the house, crying and realizing that I was a replaceable part in a factory of children. I started noticing the small, cruel ways my parents maintained control. If one of us showed too much interest in a hobby that didn't benefit the family brand, it was subtly discouraged. When my brother wanted to join the high school football team, my father told him it was impossible because he was needed to help with the heavy lifting on the property. When I wanted to take an art class, my mother said we couldn't afford the supplies, even though she had just spent hundreds on a new vanity for her Get Ready With Me videos. It was a slow-motion theft of our futures. We were being groomed to be extensions of their personalities, never allowed to develop our own. I remember looking at my younger siblings, the ones who still had light in their eyes, and feeling a crushing weight of guilt. I was helping raise them to be as miserable and invisible as I was. We were all just numbers in a sequence, and the sequence was getting longer every year. One evening, I caught my younger brother, Sam, crying behind the industrial freezer. He was 7. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he had forgotten his middle name, and was too scared to ask Mom because she was busy filming a day in the life segment. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a quirk of a large family. It was a systemic erasure of our humanity. We were losing the basic components of our identity, because there was simply no storage space for them in our parents' hearts. I spent that entire night writing down Sam's full name, his birthday, and his favorite color on a piece of paper and tucking it into his pillowcase. I told him, "Don't ever let them make you forget who you are." But the truth was, I was forgetting who I was too. My grades started slipping because I was too tired to study after finishing the mountain of laundry for 19 people. When a teacher called home to express concern, my mother didn't ask me what was wrong. She asked me how I could be so disloyal as to make the family look bad to the school district. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, the tension in the house was at an all-time high. My parents were planning a massive family reunion special for their growing online following. A multi-day event where all 16 since Chloe was gone, of us were supposed to perform, share testimonials about our wonderful upbringing, and celebrate my parents' 25th anniversary. They were obsessed with the optics. They bought us all matching outfits and hired a professional film crew. I was expected to give a speech about how my mother was my best friend, and how my father taught me the value of hard work. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. My father hadn't had a real conversation with me in 3 years that didn't involve him asking me to fix the lawnmower or move a bunk bed. My mother didn't know my favorite color, my favorite subject, or even the fact that I had been secretly saving money from a part-time job at a local library to apply for colleges across the country. They saw me as a prop, a background character in the David and Sarah show. So, that was the situation I was in. I was being forced to lie to the world to protect a legacy that was actively erasing my identity. And I knew that if I didn't do something drastic, I would end up just like the house. extended, overburdened, and hollow. Before I tell you the absolute nuclear option I chose to take during that live-streamed event, I want you to pause and think. If you were a number in a house where you weren't even worth a birthday cake, would you play along to keep the peace? Or would you set the truth on fire? Comment below, and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. The pressure in the weeks leading up to the reunion was suffocating. My mother was on a warpath, making sure every child knew their lines and stayed in their assigned color-coded zone for the cameras. She even tried to buy a replacement trophy for the one she threw away years ago, just so she could film a scene of us bonding over my spelling bee win. A win she didn't even remember until she went through her old Facebook posts. The fake sentimentality made me sick. I watched my younger brothers being coached on how to say, "I love you, Dad," with just the right amount of enthusiasm. It wasn't a family reunion, it was a production. I spent my nights in the library, not just working but planning. I reached out to Chloe, my runaway sister, and we talked for hours in secret. She told me about the world outside, about how it felt to be an individual with a name and a choice. Her voice was the only thing that kept me sane. She told me that the only way to stop a monster is to take away its audience. That's when I knew what I had to do. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to make sure they couldn't do this to the younger kids. I wanted to break the lens through which they viewed us. I began documenting everything. I used my old phone to record the way my mother spoke to us when the big cameras were off. I recorded the empty fridge, the piles of bills my father ignored, and the way the younger kids were left to fend for themselves while my parents spent hours editing their perfect life. I gathered testimonials from my older siblings who were too afraid to speak up, but were willing to let me be their voice. I realized that the family reunion wasn't just a celebration. It was a desperate attempt to boost their sagging engagement numbers. They needed us to be perfect so they could stay relevant. They were banking everything on this one night, including a massive new contract with a lifestyle brand that would have tied us to this charade for another 5 years. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my 5-year-old sister grow up thinking her only purpose was to be a smiling face in a thumbnail. The day of the reunion arrived, and the atmosphere was electric with fake smiles and hairspray. The film crew had set up lights in our backyard, making the whole place look like a movie set. My parents were in their element, glowing under the attention of the cameras, talking about the blessing of a full quiver and the joy of a crowded home. When it was finally my turn to take the microphone for my tribute speech, the red light on the main camera was blinking, signifying we were live to over 100,000 viewers. My mother gave me a scripted wink, expecting the rehearsed lines about her gentle heart. Instead, I pulled out a stack of papers, not the script they wrote for me, but the actual journals I had kept for 7 years. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just started reading. I read the entry from the night of my spelling bee. I read the entry where I described how we were often left in the care of a 12-year-old for days while my parents went on marriage retreats to talk about parenting. I read the list of every time one of us had been injured or sick and was told to tough it out because a doctor's visit for 17 kids was too expensive, even while my father bought a new truck for the channel's aesthetic. I read about the time my younger brother cried for 3 nights because he was hungry, and my mother told him to offer it up because she didn't want to break her grocery budget for the month. I looked into the lens and I saw the viewer count climbing, 150K, 200K, 300K. People were seeing the truth in real time. I described the isolation room my father had built in the basement, a windowless cell where we were sent to reflect on our sins if we ever talked back or failed to follow the filming schedule. I saw my mother's face turn a ghostly shade of white as she realized I wasn't just venting. I was providing evidence. I held up my phone to the microphone and played a recording of her screaming at my 6-year-old sister for ruining a take by tripping over a wire. The audio was crystal clear. The angel of motherhood was revealed as a tyrant. The silence that fell over that yard was deafening. My father tried to step forward to take the microphone, his face a mask of calculated concern, saying I was going through a mental health crisis. But I stepped back and kept going. I looked directly into the camera lens and told the viewers that they weren't watching a family. They were watching a cult of personality built on the backs of neglected children. I revealed that the happy kids they saw on screen were often threatened with extra chores or isolation time. if they didn't smile enough during filming. I mentioned Chloe by name, telling the world that she didn't leave because she was selfish, but because she wanted to survive. My siblings were frozen. Some were crying, some were looking at the ground, and a few of the older ones were actually nodding. The film crew didn't know whether to cut the feed or keep rolling for the drama. And since the views were skyrocketing, they kept rolling. My parents finally snapped. My father grabbed my arm, his grip tighter than it had ever been, and hissed that I was destroying everything they worked for. I looked him in the eye and said, "You never worked for us. You worked for them," and I pointed at the camera. He tried to wrestle the mic away, but by then several of my older brothers had stepped in between us. For the first time, the commanders weren't taking orders from the generals. They were protecting their own. The chaos that followed was absolute. My father began screaming at the film crew to shut it down, but the live chat was already a waterfall of horror and outrage. Thousands of people were calling for an investigation. My mother fell to her knees, not in grief, but in a staged attempt to look like a broken woman for the remaining cameras. It was her last performance, and it was her worst. The crew finally cut the power, but it was too late. The stream had been ripped and shared across every major social media platform. By midnight, the Miller truth was the #1 trending topic worldwide. I spent that night locked in my room with my younger siblings, while my parents screamed at each other in the hallway, blaming one another for allowing me to get so out of control. They didn't even think to check on us. They were too busy checking their analytics as the numbers plummeted. The aftermath was a total explosion. The live stream was cut shortly after, but the damage was done. Clips of my confession went viral within hours. My parents' sponsors dropped them faster than I could count, and social services actually showed up at the house 2 days later to conduct a full investigation based on the neglect I described. They found evidence of fire code violations in our overcrowded rooms, and a complete lack of medical records for the youngest 5 children. They found the isolation room, and saw the locks on the outside of the doors. It wasn't just neglect, it was psychological warfare. The fallout was messy. My parents tried to sue me for defamation. But you can't defame someone with the truth, especially when half of your siblings eventually stepped up to back your story. My brother Sam showed the investigators the paper I had hidden in his pillowcase, telling them it was the only thing that made him feel real. The family was fractured. The younger kids were placed with relatives while the investigation continued, and the house, that massive, sprawling monument to my father's ego, was put up for sale because they could no longer afford the taxes without the YouTube income. I moved out that night, staying with a friend until I could get my own place with the money I'd saved. Chloe was there for me, helping me navigate the legal mess and the emotional fallout. We spent many nights just sitting in silence, marveling at the fact that we were finally free. The transition to a normal life was terrifying. I didn't know how to cook for just one person. I didn't know how to exist in a room without 3 other people breathing. I had to learn how to be an individual from scratch. My younger siblings are slowly starting to heal. Some of them are in therapy, and for the first time, they are being asked what they want for dinner, what they want to be when they grow up, and what color they want their rooms to be. My parents were eventually charged with several counts of child endangerment, and were given heavy fines and a permanent ban from filming their children for profit. It wasn't the happy ending people want. My parents still haven't forgiven me, and they spend their time on smaller platforms now, playing the victims of cancel culture and targeted harassment. They post long, rambling videos about how I was brainwashed by the modern world to turn against my own blood. They still don't get it. They probably never will. They are still looking for an audience, but they no longer have their children to use as props. I sometimes wonder if they even miss us, or if they just miss the numbers we brought in. My father recently sent me an email asking me to come home so we could film a reconciliation video to save their new channel. I didn't even reply. I just deleted it. I realized then that to them, I will always be a commodity. But for the first time in my life, I am not a number. I am a person. I have a name, I have a voice, and I am no longer invisible. The house is gone, the channel is dead, and the Miller legacy is a cautionary tale. But my siblings are finally starting to live. I see them now, and they aren't looking for a camera, they're looking at the world. They are making friends, joining clubs, and failing tests without it being a family crisis. They are allowed to be messy, and they are allowed to be human. The moral of my story is that a house can be full of people and still be the loneliest place on earth if there is no room for the individual. Love isn't a resource to be managed. It's a connection to be nurtured, and you cannot demand loyalty from children you haven't truly raised. I lost my family to find myself, and while it hurts, I would do it again in a heartbeat to save my younger siblings from a lifetime of being props in someone else's play. They deserve to be the main characters of their own lives, not supporting actors in a lie. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by exposing the truth, and subscribe for more stories about breaking the cycle. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or was it long overdue? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of the younger kids? Or was the truth the only way to save them? Do you think parents who exploit their children for views should face harsher consequences? I want to hear your take on this. I'll see you all in the next story.